You ready? Peter, can we unmute Al? Al's going to be leading the discussion.
Now I can unmute. No?
Thank you. I hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody back from the lunch break. And we're down to the last mile here of the 2-day workshop. Can I have the slides brought up to the screen for everybody to see?
Yep. Can we do Rick's first? Yes, 3.
Do what?
Rick's first.
Oh, sure.
I'm
What
sorry.
order are they?
They have your slides? Okay.
You want to go first? We're going to let Rick Avila do the technical breakout first, so you can take my slides down.
All right.
What?
Okay. This should go pretty quick. Let's hope. Yes. Okay, so we came out with 2 agreed upon recommendations and a third that is controversial. So we like controversy, so we're gonna discuss it with you all and see what you think. Okay, so if you guys have been following the history, in 2021, we said let's put together a imaging protocol guidance for COVID-19, and we got that published under QIW, and we put out some really useful information regarding standard recon kernels that for quantitative imaging we should rely upon, and we actually got the vendors to look at those and agree upon those, everything went so well that we said let's now extend it to be lung cancer screening and COPD, or let's say emphysema and wall thickness, and that's been going on quite well for the last 8 months or so, and I think we're going to be basically finishing that up probably early next year in terms of a protocol for both lung cancer screening and emphysema at the very least. But for this recommendation, we're saying let's not waste any time. Let's move on to adding coronary calcium to guidance documents that we release. Now QIW is no longer as of December, so we're not going to be doing it under QIW, but that doesn't stop us at all. The plan is, though, to leverage existing lung cancer screening and emphysema, the guideline writing group that we have in place, which includes Chuck Hatt, Sean Fain from who are leading the QIW lung density group, and also Ella Kazaruni and people like David Yankelevitz and Artit and many other notable names, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to pursue this in stages. We're going to start it, let's say, approximately now, if it's agreed that this is a recommendation we want to do, and we'll bring in some cardiac experts. I think we had some on our session earlier, right? We'll review the guidelines and the literature like we've done before, and available data, reach some consensus, and publish a manuscript. So any thoughts? This was the least controversial recommendation we came up with.
I think it's a great idea.
Who's gonna endorse this? And I use that word endorse carefully. It's not going to be a QIW guideline document, right? I mean, and I have a suggestion. Ask different organizations to say we endorse this. If it's worth anything, I think like LCAP would want to endorse it. I bet you if we get the Europeans, Matthias's organization might say they'll endorse it. And why don't we get a few, maybe ALA would say they endorse it. I don't know, but I think, that's a nice way of doing things because you're going to have people participating in this from all of these organizations and it'll carry a lot of weight. I think, possibly even more than the former Kiba logo. Maybe even ACR would endorse this. Ella's part of the writing group.
David, I appreciate what you're saying. I also think it's important to point out that we might still transition. We've been talking with ALA about potentially helping us with sponsorship. And there's a model in which we could continue interacting with RSNA and their new quantitative imaging group, QSIC. And those conversations will be conducted between now and November 22nd. But I would point out that the last guideline document that we did was not a KIBA formally document. There was an approval process that was somewhat challenging. We just did it, and we did not have.
No, the COVID-19 was approved by KIBA. We're also working on the second document, which is now the logos on screen and emphasis.
You're mute, Rick.
Oh. Well, Jim, this it sounds to me like the thing
I can't hear you, David.
Sorry.
You gotta watch out.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a lot of experience with working with RSNA already. And we put a decade into Kiba and basically did not get very far. And why would you then say Kiba 2 will be better? I think we have lots of organizations that have been around for a while that we should just go to them and get their endorsement. That's my view.
I don't think it's an either or, because I agree with you. I think we should do both. And if it turns out that the transition to the new organization, Kiba, is a problematic thing, whatever they're going to call it, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think we get sign off from our European colleagues, sign off from some organizations here in the US. I think if ALA is going to become interested in this in some way, that's wonderful. I'm all for it. But I think we should get a big group to endorse this because I think it is powerful.
Yes, David. Bruno also had some suggestions from the Zoom STR.
Okay. Yeah.
So let me throw out a curveball then, since we're already do it again. Okay, so let me throw out a curveball then, since we're already developing
The lung screen and emphysema document.
and it's not complete. Do we just push through and add coronary calcium to that original document and not put out but two guidelines in the next year? What are you gonna?
You talking on my thing?
So the thought was,
Am
I-
muted? I think-
Can't tell.
No, we
So-
can hear you.
So the thought was, we're already developing this guidance. It's already lung screen and emphysema. Why wait till that's done and then complete this coronary calcium one when we can just add coronary calcium to that effort?
I think it'd be much more complicated to do it in one document than in two.
But in the end,
we have to do it.
do it in one document.
We'll bring it back into, but we're going to have to do that a certain amount of amalgamation with stuff we did before as well.
It's a timing issue. How close are you to having this? I mean, if you're close to having this combined emphysema lung screening document out, then just get it. But if it's going to be another, 6 months or something, then
We
at
wanted
least
to
as
have,
far as I'm concerned, because it ultimately has to be all three.
it was going to be a draft at the end of November. That's our
Right.
goal.
Right. Rick had a draft planned for the end of November.
Well, I'm deep in writing. You can't tell. Anyway, we're
You got till 10:30 tonight, Rick.
the timing comment is helpful. Let's what we'll do is we'll bring it up on the next call for this this group, and most likely we'll create 2 documents. One for if you want to flip the flavor of emphysema and lung screening, you got 1 document. If you want all 3 in a swirl, you get a 3rd document. How's that? Okay. All right. So there's no issue with this. I mean, this was the least controversial, right? This was the easy one. All right. Raul, any final thoughts on this one?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said. I think bringing coronary calcium will be probably a key driver of this. So I will favor that for sure. And then how to spin this out, I think getting endorsement from major societies will be helpful, and could be just a position paper. Let's not forget that. Maybe we could go to a journal, I think, and put it as a position paper and set the reference. I think it's less, I think endorsement is crucial, but then getting this out is the key piece. And in getting it with, building the consensus among experts in the field, really building the group that you have done, Rick. So, yeah.
Well, it would be wonderful if we could get that additional endorsement. Okay, so we'll keep moving on this. Let's go to the second recommendation. So we're watching AI eat the world right now, and it's taking no prisoners. It's going into reconstruction. It's going into, actually, almost every talk brought up AI during this conference, and it was a little scary, actually. So we feel that we're recognizing that deep learning is going to impact AI for CT reconstruction, CT reconstruction. It has great potential to improve thoracic imaging, not just on radiation dose, not just on lowering noise, but also on image quality, and many other things. But for sure, there's going to be potentially major problems and issues for quantitative measurements of small objects, which is what our domain is. So we recommend forming an additional study data / collaboration group to look at this issue. We'll want to look at it from multiple angles, multidisciplinary, multiple components of this problem, and how to validate what we think is the right thing to do. And we view the data sources as the traditional ones: clinical data sets, phantom data sets, 3D printed phantom data sets, simulation, as well as taking view data from CT scanners and augmenting or adding lesions to existing scan data. This will be an informal activity, which will help not just us understand the boundaries of these methods, but it could help the vendors themselves. Bruno Deman was very helpful and looks very interested in helping, in being involved in this. I think we owe it to our community to make sure that we don't have any major hiccups in reconstruction. By the way, all of these groups talking about creating an AI for this, for cardiac, for all these applications, they're training on 20-year-old data, 10-year-old data. And when this new AI reconstruction methods come out, the question is, well, what kind of interactions are going to happen there? So I don't want to get too alarmist on it, but definitely need to take a look at this and make sure we don't find out late that a whole bunch of people got scans and guidance or whatever measurements that weren't great. So this is a recommendation basically to meet more regularly throughout the year, which is what we want to do in the quantitative imaging workshop, and continue to focus on this and look at it and report on the next quantitative imaging workshop or whatever we call it at that point. So any comments, concerns?
Rick, would this be a good place to also put the aspiration to develop a Python toolkit resource, open source, consortial resource?
Well, you're referring to our efforts to clean up MTF calculations and things like that. Yeah. So I think what's evolving, what you're touching on, is that there's a tremendous need for open source resources and tools around our collective efforts to do lung screening and cardiac and emphysema. And we're doing it piecemeal right now, but maybe we should formalize it, put in a grant to really do it correctly, as opposed to, again, just somebody saying, oh, here's some tools. You're on mute.
I'm like Bruce now. It's contagious.
Welcome back, Bruce.
Are you planning on getting representatives from each of the manufacturers, Rick?
So the interesting question about that, I mean, yes, the answer is yes.
Maybe you'll get someone from Canon to join.
Yeah. So the funny thing is that when you bring two different vendors together, they act very differently. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge sometimes. But let's sort of feel it out in terms of how it goes. But it would be great to have vendor support.
I just think this is a very ambitious goal, to put this kind of working group together and meet regularly and that sort of thing. I certainly think it's worthwhile. I'm not sure there's anything quite like it right now, even though you'd think there would be. I'm sure the people in the medical physics world have some subcommittee that does this, but especially with a view towards the kind of work we're doing, I doubt there is anything quite like this. But I think there could be a really wonderful role for it. You heard Matthias going on and the need for standardization of quality, that this is absolutely necessary. So, it's a great opportunity. I think you'll be able to get a lot of Europeans to join in this endeavor. So
Well,
I think it's, yeah.
You also touched on something which has been a problem in the past, which is there's been attempts to, let's say, standardize and make recommendations, but just from, let's call it, the medical physics world, right? But the problem is that these problems are not just medical physics. They involve some very sophisticated algorithms for AI, deep learning AI. They involve image processing. They involve computer vision. They involve statistics and obviously clinical issues. So it's highly multidisciplinary.
Well, we know how protective the medical physics folks are already over their calibration devices.
We don't want to revisit that, that's for sure. Okay, so yes, it is a little ambitious, but we don't have to, bite it all off at once, right? I mean, we can start meeting early next year and that kind of thing. Raul, any further thoughts here?
No, I agree that it's ambitious, but I clearly, I think when it comes down to the metrology aspect, I think there is an opportunity to get a hold on this. And obviously, we cannot prescribe the methods that will be put forward, but then we can definitely prescribe the quality. That is, I think, what you are referring. Like having this quote unquote qualification approach to define the characteristics of an AI kernel, taking into account that I think an AI kernel because it's more complex, probably sometimes is trained with a prior model, no, of potentially or likely a human. I think that it brings a new kind of a complexity there for this multi-axis, validation approach, and where you need probably phantoms, you need real clinical data. So to me, defining the framework of what can be that validation approach or even framework is one of the key elements. The charter of this working group could be that. I think to David's point, I think it has to be confining what is this working group, what it's trying to achieve. And to me, developing the framework in which this can be done, I think it will be interesting, because it's very complex and you need sort of have that, as you were saying, Rick, this expertise from many different domains, from the people training these systems, from the people also collecting, doing the kind of the statistical analysis. So that is, I think, in my opinion, the opportunity that is probably narrow enough in a scope, so it's not untenable, and also doesn't bring, doesn't really conflict to some degree with the vendors. Like, obviously it's not like we're going to redesign their AI kernels, or the AI reconstruction approaches as they come through. It's just basically getting the new framework to validate those from a quantitative imaging standpoint. That's sort of, I guess, the view on this, on the potential, how we could steer the recommendation. I think we need to define the scope of this working group. That's what
I think the first step is to just define when we start to run into trouble. So there's certain deep learning techniques that might result in, let's say, more issues than it's worth. And if we can just pick off the things that are really, really bad and at least advise both the vendors and the world, what the issues we see are from our point of view, I think we'll have done all ourselves a favor. So I just want to also point out another reason why this is extremely ambitious is because there's probably very few fields in this world right now that is moving as fast as AI. So just trying to give some thoughts and guidance on where it is might be futile, because in another 6 months to a year, all the hardware, all the algorithms might have changed entirely or largely. So anyway, this is I think very worth our time, and could yield some really good results. Again, just giving advice as to what we see as potential issues as this stuff rolls out, and it will roll out for sure. So, okay, so that's number 2. Now you got to strap on your seatbelts and stow your tray tables, because we're going to do the more controversial item right now. So let me walk through this real quick. So the problem what we're going to try to address here is that top diagram you see, which is that a CT scanner is going to take in a very large amount of human diversity, and it should produce a really representative image. But because there's so much parameters, so many parameters, it's a very high dimensional space. There is potentially large scanner variability. One scanner could use a recon kernel that greatly, let's say, enhances edges, and another scanner might do it much differently. So the problem is that analysis software, especially FDA-approved analysis software, doesn't care, generally speaking, how the image was formed. It'll in most analysis software will take almost anything and give you back an answer, give the clinician an answer. And as a result, as we've seen, the whole point of QIBA and the whole point of the quantitative imaging workshop is to try and reduce that variability So the current status right now is when FDA and other regulatory bodies approve software, they require there is no requirement that they define what they're allowing as input to the software. So this was something that I proposed, which is what if we were to have a series of discussions to see if we can create a standard for defining what would be required for input to a piece of software in terms of image quality. And the hope is that that requirement, which could be set by the vendor when they go after regulatory approval, the vendor of the analysis software, would result in tighter variance on the results. So the bottom image is kind of the wish. So we did not have consensus on this. We had some people, we had a very small number of people for one, and for two, approximately half of us thought it was okay to do this, and another half, I think, felt it was going a bridge too far. But I did water down the recommendation a little bit. I just recommended to meet and discuss the potential for developing such guidelines that could inform a regulatory standard, an international regulatory, and we could invite regulatory bodies into the discussion. So let me throw it out for questions, comments. What do you guys think? Are we crazy here?
Rick, I think this is fine. I don't think it's that controversial. I think software conformance was one of the soft spots with Kiva. There was a lot of concern, but there hadn't been much work. So to meet and talk about it and see what's feasible and what sticks to the wall, I think it's very reasonable. We have data now that it is an important source of error, and these critical measurements of small objects and stuff like that, looking at change, we know it's going to be an issue. So, add it to the pile.
Raul?
Yeah, no, I guess, I mean, to me, Enrique, is how this tied with, and I agree, this is, I think, I see this as a controversial, no? I think we were all part of that discussion, mostly around the complexity in the regulatory space. I think the way the process is, no, the way also vendors will, or analysis software vendors might react when obviously what they want is to qualify their product, ASAP. So, and I think that is what my sense of this is what we see the real world, the real life problems, that is large scanner variability for a vendor is, look, I'm going to do my certification in a given kernel with some characteristics, and that is what my sort of software does. No, so I think, to me, reconciling really the goals and how this tied also with what we were saying prior to that. No, because I think in the new world where the scanner is produced will be AI driven. So I think there is sort of a nice, to some degree, a nice potentially could be an interlock between what the prior working group can do in that recommendation to what this kind of software requirement characteristics guidelines, quality guidelines could provide. So it's kind of an interesting. I don't have a clear answer. I don't see. It's a very diffuse boundary to me now. It's hard to see where even the stakeholders will be. So I'm having an issue seeing how we can make progress on this in a manner.
Let's make clear though that we're not saying that an external group is going to define for the world what the quality of scans is going to be going into all software. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to define some way, a good, useful way for a vendor to describe how they're going to allow data to come into their software. And then let them define it. Let them say, hey, if they're taking all resolutions, then they're allowed to say that. But right now, they're not saying anything, as far as I can tell, either to the regulatory bodies or to the customers in terms of really defining what the software will allow as input. Anyway, okay. Those were our three recommendations. The third one was not with full consensus. And I guess this is for further discussion. And I think we're out of time pretty much, right?
Okay, Rick, I think this is great. I think in the absence of any other comments, I think we can move forward. And thank you all for your help with this.
Okay, so we'll transition to the clinical breakout slides if we could. And I'm going to go through the bulk of these slides fairly quickly. Most of them are summaries of the discussions that we had yesterday. And then the last slide or two really have the potential action items that we want to try to put into place for this coming year. Next slide, please. So we had a lot of discussion around the fact that the new ACS guidelines are likely going to move along the rapidity with which more individuals are going to be considered eligible for screening. And that will put, even though it's still a small number of people being screened, the hope is that that will pick up. And that's going to put challenges forward with regard to the workforce capacity, all the way from the radiologist reading the scan to individuals taking care of patients once findings are made. And the goal should be to try to put together the right bodies to, and by that I mean organizations, to help facilitate planning and potentially educate the workforce about and the patients as to what these changes mean. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of discussion around the coronary artery calcification situation, which seems to be a little bit farther along in some of the pulmonary findings of emphysema and fibrosis. But again, much of this revolved around the fact, how much of this do you report? What are the downstream consequences of reporting this? What are the reimbursement issues of reporting this? So there are some studies being looked at by the cardiologists, some through the PCORI grants as a possible trial to look at a large population of individuals to use the CAC score to see if there could be a difference made with regard to patient outcome. And just feel to jump in if there's a question on these slides as we go through. Next slide, please. The Rubinska study was brought up, a trial was brought up a couple times. And again, this is in the area of looking at cardiovascular disease from a preventive standpoint. We've heard about how studies like this are going to look at potential sizes of the ventricles, trying to predict atrial fib, trying to predict stroke, just more and more scoring around cardiovascular disease and trying to prevent the downstream consequences of what's seen on this lung cancer screen. We may have some readout of the Rubinska trial. I think he said 6 months or so was the comment that was made. Next slide, please. We had a nice discussion around the lung findings that come out of a lung cancer screening CT, particularly around the ILAs or interstitial lung abnormalities. Lee Gazorian from Leahy talked about how he's doing work in identifying these findings through the use of a AI tool. And then the important part about this is that tool then identifies patients that can be interacted with a navigator to send them down the right road of referral to either pulmonologist, primary care, thoracic surgeon, whatever the abnormality is. But more importantly, define a group of individuals where progressive pulmonary fibrosis might be found at an early stage and create a database of patients that might be useful to the pharmaceutical industry, since there's only right now 2 drugs approved for treating pulmonary fibrosis or slowing it down. By getting it earlier, it may be able to make a difference with other drugs being brought into the pipeline to potentially reverse some of the abnormalities in an ideal world. Next slide, please. Fairly complicated slide, but we heard a lot about, and I don't know if Richard's still on the line. I saw him there earlier. Richard Frank talked about some of the coding that is going to be coming into place starting in January. It's a T code. We heard a little bit about that earlier today as well, the role of the T codes with regard to digital coding. And then also talking about how a suite of services might be able to be put onto software that a smoking bundle or a thoracic disease bundle might be used by radiologists in the AI tool to identify different aspects of pulmonary findings, cardiac findings, and for that matter, osteoporosis findings on a scan if it's bundled in such a way that the reimbursement issues can be handled. It's a complicated slide, but any comments on that, just feel free to.
Can I just
Sure.
say one thing real quickly? Just from a historical perspective, we have been meeting, coming up with these recommendations, and Rick has been very concerned that we also keep track of progress that we're making. And so I went back to last year's presentation by Richard Frank, and he had committed to addressing some of the issues and moving it through the process and making specific solutions for tool development for application in this quantitative imaging space for thoracic CT. And the fact that he was able to do that, get it through committee, and now have it as a specific area that's going to be get to category 3 approval for, it's just now being, it just released that it's now formally a CPT code. It's a category 3, which means it will be documented but not reimbursed. But when they have more comfort level about the practice, it will be available for evaluation, for compensation, as well as reimbursement. So for the people that have been spending their time with this, we are making progress on issues that are of visceral concern to certain stakeholder groups.
Thanks, Jim. Next slide, please. This was the around, this was a discussion. Part of it was how could we incentivize some of the newer technology and newer reporting being done. I believe this had to do with Bruce's comment about incentivizing individuals or institutions that do higher quality or more standard of care type of reporting and penalizing, use not the best term, those institutions or radiology groups that don't perform that. I think there's some downsides to that. But the most important part on this slide, and we keep coming back to the fact that manpower is an issue, or woman power, wherever they get person power. Nurse navigation has proven to be a good way to facilitate patients through a system, whether it's a lung cancer screening program where the nurse navigator helps patients get enrolled, put through the screening process, and ideally have them be followed up in the appropriate time frame, 3 months, 6 months, a year, because we know the compliance with this is very lacking. And a nurse navigation reimbursement is on the horizon and may make a big difference with regard to how we handle patients once they get the screening program done. Next slide, please. This was back to the coronary targets. Sure, what's different on this slide compared to before. Again, all the different aspects of cardiac disease are listed here. Muscle size, pulmonary artery size, some of which is being measured already by others, aortic size. This all has to do with whether or not appropriate gating of the EKG along with these findings is put in place in order to better determine the validity of these findings.
So it went into a little bit more detail, but the critical thing that came up in the discussions this morning is, when do you have enough confidence about these measurements that you feel obliged to share that information back with the screening participant?
Right. And we don't have an answer for that.
But it's a good issue and
Right. And we know there's a different issue in the Netherlands as a result of that.
there'll be lots of contact and lots of,
A lot more discussion here. Next slide, please. Again, the reimbursement issues, and there was again the idea of developing or approaching PCORI to get a trial together to show how making these findings available to the treating physician and following them over the course of time may make a difference with regard to patient quality of life and outcomes. Unmute.
yeah, the issue was if they did the trial after it's complete with outcomes, can they make that data and images available to start aggregating these types of image collections that everybody says they need for the tool development and validation of AI tools and whatnot? But would PCORI be potentially interested in sponsoring the growth of this post-clinical trial databases that NIH is really pushing quite hard now? And it makes sense in this context as well.
This would be similar to the open source imaging that we heard about yesterday from Elizabeth Estes.
Absolutely.
Next slide, please. Okay, we had a good discussion earlier today about metrics that may help facilitate getting more people through the screening process. We heard a lot about the HEDIS measure that's being worked on, and by their report, they're hoping to get a tool out, a validated tool out by early 2025. They're in the midst of doing more studies, and they're looking to find health systems in place to then use the tool to get it validated. There was also discussion around STAR measures for Medicare Advantage programs, which again would be another quality metric that should stimulate healthcare systems, ACOs, and practitioners to follow the guidelines of getting more people screened for lung cancer if they met the criteria. A little bit of discussion around the shared decision-making as well, which we know is still part of the criteria. Next slide. We also heard a lot today about the cost sharing, especially around preventive services. And it really was complicated as to how many different insurance companies, different programs, different co-pays, different deductibles, and the fact that a lot of this is probably oversight, lack of correct coding at times, not enough knowledgeable navigators to help people get through the process of getting a preventive study without the copay, which right now, according to ACA, should be no cost sharing in many situations, but we also heard not all situations, and patients need to be aware of that. And the downstream costs of the findings at the time of the screen are also an issue with regard to individuals having to pay out of pocket potentially. So a whole issue around no cost sharing for preventive and follow-up services was discussed. And certainly this is an area where disparities and inequities become very apparent when there is cost involved. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. I think this is, this is the slide where we're going to try to move forward on some of these actions. As I said earlier, we want to try to get people ready for this 19 million individuals who are now eligible for screening if people follow the ACS guidelines. I know there is some work that has to be done around the fact that people right now, once the 15-year since quitting is eliminated, these people will not currently be covered under the USPSTF framework. There is going to be some, hopefully, a consortium of organizations get together to talk to Medicare and the USPSTF to see if that can be changed sooner rather than later. Also, around all the discussions we have, the different payment strategies related to the no cost sharing and certainly reimbursement to the radiologists and to the radiology practices around the amount of time spent in reporting out additional findings than usual lung RADs. We also know that the volume of patients that are going to be now hopefully going through screening will need to have a workflow put into place where, again, cutting back to the navigator process may be very important. Jim Mulshine has already just mentioned the fact we want to try to approach PCORI to develop a trial or a database of patients who go through these studies, and that database can then be used by researchers to validate why we want to have these things reported, what interventions are needed in order to improve quality of life and ultimately show improvement in mortality if possible. I think this last bullet has to do with hoping to get companies like the CT scanner companies, maybe even the AI companies, to be in a preclinical space, a pre-competitive space, to cooperate in coming up with models for AI and interacting with the payer system. Is that correct?
Yeah, but that's the database that Simon and
OSIC, right.
OSIC, building on that OSIC.
Right. So as you can see, a lot of work to be done here, but I think it's going to be up to advocacy organizations, professional societies to start working together, especially when it comes to seeing if we can move the needle on the USPSTF and Medicare coverage issues with the new guidelines that American Cancer Society is pushing. And we'll stay tuned with regard to the nurse navigator coverage that hopefully maybe Anita can tell us when that might be available, or
It just came out
It just came out
yesterday.
yesterday.
Yeah, the
Yesterday.
final rule.
Yeah, the final one.
okay, good.
One other thing.
Mhm.
The
One other nugget that Bruce shared with us was the comfort level of CMS and other of these people to do retrospective analysis of administrative data and show value in that setting. And David was very interested in this. And I think because there's such a hunger for, how to get new tools, moving forward, looking at that administrative data and doing retrospective analyses to demonstrate utility and other features is an avenue that we should support, because in certain circumstances it may really accelerate access to putting these things into clinical implementation. David, do you want to comment on that?
I'm remembered to turn off my mute. Yeah, I thought that was one of the really interesting points that Bruce made, and I fully agree. I think we can do a lot with that, and we are sitting on the data, and we have it organized in the type of database that's necessary. We can some of the results are already in our data forms, like the coronary calcium score, for example. And Bruce has kind of volunteered to do the Medicare portion of this, check all of what's happened to these patients. So Bruce and I are planning on getting together to design this retrospective study. And Claudia is, I think, very interested in seeing this happen as well. But I think we could do a lot here. We're talking about this sort of providing the preliminary information for what's been termed thoracic bundle. I don't know what you're saying to me. Oh, my camera on? There's only, yeah, okay.
Thanks, David.
But yeah, so I think this would be pretty neat. I don't know. Yeah, I think this would have to be done sort of a little bit on the fly. I don't think anybody's going to fund us to do this, but I think this is something that if it's easy enough to do, which I think it will be. Oh,
Well,
there's
we should
Bruce.
see
I
if
see
there are
a
funding
thumbs up.
sources.
I see Bruce is already there with the thumbs up. Yeah. So yeah, I think this is really a very, very powerful tool that we could use to start creating this sort of thoracic bundle. I think so. That's the path that our group wants to go down.
Good. All right. Any other comments from either the panelists or the individuals in the audience who persevered with us? the end of the program on Friday afternoon.
Y-
Jim?
I think if it's okay with you, I think we might go back to how Bo started in terms of thanking the staff who are with us now. This was a real challenge and we had some technical difficulties, no question about it. I think there's going to be lessons learned that can be readily addressed going forward. But it really has been a remarkably productive forum and really high quality presentations, wonderful representations of very important stakeholder thought leaders. It's been wonderful. Any final comments for you,
Jim,
Al?
I just want to thank you also, Jim, for driving a lot of this. You've been involved in every aspect, really pushing these meetings. So thank you.
Well,
All right, so once again, thank you to everybody, including the staff here today. And we'll keep you posted on what's going to happen next year. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
thank you all. Thanks, Al. Thanks.